There's a day in the life of every child raised in a narcissistic family that no one talks about. It's not the day of the first spanking. It's not the day of the first public humiliation. It's not even the day you realized your parents didn't love you the way they should have. It's a day far more silent, far more invisible. It's the day your childhood died, and you didn't even realize it. Carl Jung spent decades studying this phenomenon. He observed that in narcissistic families, there's a specific moment, almost always forgotten, where the child makes an unconscious decision that changes everything. The decision to stop being themselves. Today I'm going to show you how to identify when this day happened in your life. I'll reveal the invisible signs that something died inside of you, and more importantly, I'll show you what Jung discovered about how to resurrect what was buried. Because the true self doesn't die, it just goes into the shadow. But before we continue, I need you to understand something fundamental about how this happens. A child cannot survive alone. Biologically, psychologically, emotionally, they are completely dependent on their parents. This dependency creates what Jung called psychic fusion or mystical participation. The child and the parents exist in psychic fusion. There is no separation. And it's exactly this fusion that creates the trap. Because when the parents are narcissistic, the child faces an impossible dilemma. If they are authentically themselves, they risk losing the love of their parents. And losing the love of their parents for a child is equivalent to death. That's not a metaphor, it's a real biological perception. The child's brain interprets parental rejection as an existential threat. So the child does the only thing they can do. They choose to survive. And choosing to survive means killing a part of themselves. Let me tell you about a woman named Emily. Emily was 38 years old when she came to my therapist's office with a strange complaint. She said she couldn't feel real. She was externally successful, married, mother of 2 children, solid career. But inside, she described a feeling of watching her own life from the outside, as if the person living that life wasn't really her. When we started exploring her history, Emily couldn't recall any obvious traumas. Her parents never hit her, never yelled, never publicly humiliated her. But something was wrong. The first significant memory that Emily could recall was from when she was 5 years old. She was in the backyard, playing alone, when she found a dead bird. She was fascinated. She picked up the bird carefully, started talking to it, imagining stories about where it had gone. Her mother appeared at the door. Emily remembers the look. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was disdain, disgust, as if Emily had done something repugnant. "Stop talking to dead things. You're weird." Emily dropped the bird, didn't cry, didn't protest, didn't say anything. But something changed in that moment. 42 years later, in my office, Emily finally understood. That was the day. The day her childhood died, not the bird. She did. The part of her that was curious, that was imaginative, that talked to dead things because she hadn't yet learned that death was taboo. That part died in that backyard. And in its place, another person was born. A person who would never be weird again, who would never do anything that provoked that look, who would spend the next 40 years performing a version of herself that was acceptable, the false self. Jung described this process in detail. He observed that the true self, when confronted with repeated rejection, does something to protect itself. It hides, goes into the shadow, and in its place the child builds a mask, a persona, a version of themselves designed to be loved. The problem is that this mask isn't real, and that's why Emily didn't feel real. Because the person she was living as wasn't her. It was a construct, a character created at 5 years old to survive. And she spent her whole life forgetting that there was someone underneath the mask. Here's something that few understand about this process. The day of death isn't always dramatic. Most of the time it's a small moment, a phrase, a look, an absence of response. "You're too much. Stop crying. "You're exaggerating. Nobody wants to hear about that. You're too sensitive." Each of these phrases, repeated over time, works like a knife. Small, almost imperceptible, but cumulative. And at some point, after enough stabs, the child makes the decision. "I'm going to stop being like this." That's the moment of death. But hold on, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything about how you understand this process. Jung discovered that there are different types of self-death. It's not a single event. There are multiple deaths, multiple burials, multiple parts of yourself being sacrificed throughout childhood. Let me show you the 5 most common types. The first type is the death of spontaneity. This happens when the child learns that being themselves is dangerous, that expressing joy, curiosity, enthusiasm generates punishment or rejection. So they start calculating every movement, every word, every facial expression. Adults who have suffered this death are recognized by their rigidity, by their difficulty relaxing, by the constant feeling that they are being watched and judged, even when they are alone. The second type is the death of sensitivity. This happens when the child learns that feeling is unacceptable, that crying is weakness, that being afraid is shameful, that needing comfort is pathetic. So they shut down, turn off their feelings, learn to be cold, rational, controlled. Adults who have suffered this death are recognized by their difficulty accessing emotions, by the feeling of chronic emptiness, by the inability to cry even when they want to, even when they know they should. The third type is the death of individuality. This happens when the child learns that being different is a crime, that having their own preferences is selfishness, that wanting things that their parents don't approve of is betrayal. So they erase themselves, stop having opinions, stop knowing what they want, become a mirror of other people's desires. Adults who have suffered this death are recognized by their difficulty making decisions, by the constant search for external approval, by the feeling of not knowing who they are when they are alone. The fourth type is the death of trust. This happens when the child learns that the world is unpredictable, that love can turn into attack at any moment, that safety doesn't exist. So they arm themselves, develop hypervigilance, learn to read micro-expressions, to anticipate danger, to never let their guard down. Adults who've experienced this death often struggle to relax in relationships. They constantly anticipate an attack. They find it impossible to trust, even when they want to, even when the other person has proven themselves trustworthy. The fifth type of death is the death of self-worth. This happens when a child learns that they're never enough, that no matter what they do, they'll never be good enough, that their very existence is a burden. So, they internalize it. They begin to believe they are fundamentally flawed, that others are right to reject them, that they don't deserve love at all. Adults who have suffered this death often struggle to accept compliments. They have a tendency to sabotage good things in their lives. They hold a deep-seated belief that they don't deserve happiness. Now, here's something crucial that changes the entire perspective. These deaths aren't real. The true self doesn't actually die, it's buried. It goes into the shadow, but it's still there, alive, waiting. Carl Jung called this individuation, the process of unearthing what has been buried, of integrating the shadow, of becoming who you really are. But this process requires something that most people avoid. It requires remembering. It requires going back to the day of the death, facing it head on. Let me tell you about a guy named Michael. Michael was 45 years old, with a successful career as an executive. He sought therapy because his third marriage was falling apart. His wife was saying the same thing as the previous two, that he was cold, distant, incapable of real intimacy. Michael didn't understand. He thought he was doing everything right. He worked hard. He provided financially. He never cheated. He was never violent. But when we started exploring, it became clear that there was an invisible wall between Michael and everyone else. a wall he couldn't cross, that he didn't even know existed. The first memory we were able to access was from when he was 7 years old. Michael was a sensitive boy. He cried easily. He was afraid of the dark. He needed comfort. His father didn't tolerate that at all. "Stop crying. Men don't cry. You're a wimp. I'm ashamed to have a son like you." Michael remembers a specific night. He'd had a nightmare. He woke up crying. He ran to his parents' bedroom. His father got up, looked at him with contempt, grabbed him by the arm, led him back to his room and threw him on the bed. "You either stop crying right now, or I'll give you something to really cry about." Michael stopped. Not just that night, forever. 38 years later, in the therapist's office, he finally cried, for the first time since that night. And as he cried, he said something that sums it all up. "I killed that boy. I killed him myself to survive my father." And it was true. The sensitive boy died that night, and in his place was born the cold executive, the man who couldn't experience intimacy, the husband who lost all his wives. But here's the part that changes everything. The boy wasn't dead. He was buried, in the shadow, waiting 38 years to be found. And when Michael finally cried, he began the process of resurrection. Hold on, because there's something important I need to show you before we continue. There's a pattern that Jung identified in all the deaths of the true self. The pattern has 3 phases. The first phase is the wound, the moment when the child expresses something authentic and receives rejection. It could be curiosity, it could be joy, it could be fear, it could be a need for comfort. Any genuine expression of the self. The second phase is the decision, the moment when the child, consciously or unconsciously, decides that that part of themselves is dangerous, that it needs to be eliminated, that survival depends on no longer being that way. The third phase is the burial, the moment when that part goes into the shadow and is replaced by the mask, by the false self, by the acceptable version. The problem is that most people can't identify when this happened. Memory doesn't work that way. Pre-verbal traumas, traumas that happen before the age of 3, aren't stored as a narrative. They're stored in the body, as sensations, as patterns of automatic response, and even traumas that happen later, when memory does function, are often repressed. The brain protects you, it hides, it makes you forget. So, how do you discover when your self died? Jung developed a method. You don't look for the memory directly, you look for the symptom, because the buried self doesn't stay quiet. It keeps sending signals, from the shadow, through dreams, through symptoms, through repetitive patterns that you can't explain. Let me show you the 7 most common signs that something died inside you and is trying to be resurrected. The first sign is the feeling of performing your own life. If you feel like you're always acting, always calculating how you should act, always observing yourself from the outside, it indicates that whoever is living your life isn't your true self. It's the mask, the character, the false self that was created to survive. The second sign is difficulty knowing what you really want. If you constantly ask yourself what you should want, what others expect you to want, what would be the right answer, it indicates that your individuality has been buried, that you've lost access to your own center of desire. The third sign is a chronic feeling of emptiness. If you feel a hole inside that nothing can fill, not success, or not relationships, or not achievements, it indicates that something essential has been removed, that you're trying to fill with external things what can only be filled by the self. The fourth sign is difficulty relaxing. If you can't rest without guilt, can't be present without anxiety, can't simply exist without doing anything, it indicates that your spontaneity has been killed, that you've been programmed for constant vigilance. The fifth sign is the tendency to feel like an imposter. If you constantly feel like you're fooling people, that at any moment they're going to discover you're a fraud, it indicates that there's a discrepancy between who you're being and who you really are. The false self knows it's false and is afraid of being discovered. The sixth sign is difficulty with intimacy. If you can't get truly close to anyone, if you always maintain a safe distance, if deep relationships scare you, it indicates that your capacity for connection has been wounded, that intimacy was associated with danger in your childhood. The seventh sign is the repetition of destructive patterns. If you keep attracting the same types of toxic relationships, making the same mistakes, falling into the same traps, it indicates that there's something unconscious governing your choices, something in the shadow, something unintegrated. Now, if you recognized at least 3 of those signs, I need to tell you something important. This isn't a defect. It's not a weakness. It's not a character flaw. This is evidence of survival. You did what you needed to do to survive an impossible childhood. And the only reason you're here, reading this, is because it worked. The false self protected you. The mask saved you. But now, you don't need it anymore. Now, you can begin the process of resurrection. Let me show you how. Carl Jung described 5 stages of the shadow integration process. 5 stages to resurrect the self that was buried. The first stage is recognition. This means stopping the denial, stopping the rationalizing, stopping saying your childhood was normal, that your parents did the best they could, that it wasn't that bad. It was bad. Something died. And you need to recognize this before you can heal. Recognition isn't about blaming your parents. It's not about playing the victim. It's simply looking at the truth, naming what happened, saying it out loud even if only to yourself. Something died inside of me during that childhood. The second stage is grief. This is perhaps the most difficult part, because it requires feeling the pain that's been avoided your entire life. When Emily finally understood what had happened in the backyard, she needed to grieve, not for the little bird, but for herself, for the curious little girl who died that day, for the life that little girl could have lived. It's a deep grief. Sometimes it feels like it will never end, but it does. And on the other side, there's liberation. The third stage is anger. Jung observed that before integrating the shadow, most people need to go through anger. The anger that was forbidden in childhood, the anger against the parents who caused the death, the anger against yourself for having collaborated. This anger doesn't need to be expressed to your parents. It can be processed in therapy, in writing, in movement. The important thing is that it's felt, because behind the anger is the true self, trying to defend itself. The fourth stage is reparenting. This means becoming the parent you needed to have. It means looking at the wounded child inside of you and giving them what they didn't receive. If your spontaneity was killed, it means giving yourself permission to be spontaneous. If your sensitivity was killed, it means validating your emotions. If your individuality was killed, it means asking yourself what you really want. It's a daily process of micro-choices, of small acts of self-care. The fifth stage is integration. This means bringing the true self back from the shadow. It means stopping using the mask all the time. It means risking being authentically you, even when it feels dangerous. Carl Jung called this individuation. The process of becoming who you really are, not who your parents wanted you to be, not who society expects, not who the false self pretends to be. You, integrated, whole, true. But here's something that few understand about this process. Integration isn't linear. You don't go from buried to resurrected in a straight line. It's a process full of relapses, of days when the mask comes back, of moments when the false self takes control again. And that's normal. 30, 40, 50 years of programming don't disappear in months. The parental complex is strong. It was built when you were completely dependent. when your survival literally depended on obeying. So be patient with yourself. Each small moment of authenticity counts. Each time you choose the true self over the mask, you weaken the old programming a little bit. Let me tell you what happened to Emily after that discovery in the therapist's office. It wasn't magical. It wasn't instantaneous. It was 2 years of work. First came the grief. Months of grief. For the little girl with the bird. For all the versions of her that had been killed throughout childhood. For the life she could have lived if she had been allowed to be herself. Then came the anger. An anger she didn't even know existed, against her mother, against the look of disdain, against all the times she was called weird for simply being herself. Then came the fear, because Emily realized she didn't know who she was without the mask, that the persona had become so automatic that she couldn't distinguish what was authentic from what was performance. And finally, came the experimentation. Emily started doing small things, things that the little girl with the bird would have done, talking to plants, drawing without a goal, standing still and looking at the sky, things that her mother would have called weird. And every time she did these things, she felt something, a little spark, a sensation of being truly alive. Not performing life, living it. After 2 years, Emily told me something I'll never forget. I don't feel like I'm watching my life from the outside anymore. For the first time in 40 years, I'm inside. I am me. That's individuation. That's resurrection. Now let me tell you about something that most people don't understand about this process. The death of the self doesn't happen once. It happens repeatedly. Every time a part of you is rejected, it goes into the shadow. And over the course of a narcissistic childhood, many parts are rejected. That's why integration also doesn't happen once. It's an ongoing process of discovering layers, of unearthing parts that you didn't even know existed. Michael, the executive who cried for the first time in 38 years, discovered this the hard way. After accessing the sensitive boy, he thought he was cured, that the work was over, that now he could move on. But a few months later, something new emerged. He started having panic attacks, out of the blue. For no apparent reason. His heart would race. He couldn't breathe. The sensation of impending death. When we explored it, we discovered another layer, another death that he hadn't accessed. It wasn't just the sensitive boy who had been killed. It was also the joyful boy, the boy who laughed loudly, who made noise, who took up space. His father didn't tolerate that either. "Shut up! Stop making a mess! Can't you behave?" And Michael had silenced himself. Not just the tears. The joy, too. The panic attacks were the joyful boy trying to resurrect, trying to come out of the shadow, making noise the only way he knew how. When Michael understood this, the attack stopped. Not immediately, but gradually. As he gave permission for the joyful boy to exist, he started laughing more, making noise, taking up space without apologizing. And his fourth marriage, unlike the previous 3, is working. Because for the first time, he's being himself. Not the cold executive, not the mask, but you. Here's something important about generational transmission. The death of the true self doesn't begin with you. Your parents also had parts of themselves, killed off in their childhoods. And they passed that death onward, not out of malice, but out of unconsciousness, out of a compulsion to repeat. Carl Jung called this psychic inheritance. The unintegrated complexes of the parents are transmitted to the children. The family shadow passes from generation to generation. This means 2 things. First, that you can have compassion for your parents. They didn't choose to be this way. They were formed this way by their own impossible childhoods. Second, that you have the responsibility to break the cycle, to not transmit to your children what was transmitted to you. And that requires integration, because what isn't integrated is repeated. If you don't resurrect the self that was buried, you will bury the self of your children. Not intentionally, because you don't know how to do differently. Let me tell you about a woman named Ashley. Ashley sought therapy, not for herself, but for her 5-year-old daughter. The daughter had started having nightmares, refusing to go to school, crying over everything. Ashley was desperate. She didn't know what to do. She had tried everything. Talking, punishing, ignoring. Nothing worked. When we started to explore Nama, it quickly became clear that the problem wasn't the daughter. It was Ashley. Ashley had been raised by a narcissistic mother who didn't tolerate weakness, and when her daughter showed fragility, Ashley felt something. An automatic reaction, irritation, contempt. The same reaction that her mother had with her. And the daughter was picking up on it. Children pick up on everything, even what isn't said, especially what isn't said. The daughter was trying not to be weak, trying not to provoke that reaction, but she was 5 years old. She couldn't manage it, and the tension was manifesting in nightmares and crying. Ashley needed to do the work first. She needed to resurrect the fragile little girl inside her, who had been killed off by her own mother. She needed to integrate that part before she could accept that part in her daughter. It took months. It was painful. But it worked. As Ashley became more compassionate with herself, she became more compassionate with her daughter. The nightmares stopped. The crying diminished. School became safe again. And the cycle was broken. If this video made you remember something, if any specific moment from your childhood came to mind, if you felt that tightness in your chest, that indicates something is being touched. That's the authentic self sending a signal from the shadow, asking to be found. The super thanks button down below is a way to support this work. Each video like this requires deep research into Jung, into developmental psychology, into childhood trauma. Your support allows me to continue bringing this type of content that no one else is bringing. But more important than any support is this, that you start the process, that you look at your own childhood with fresh eyes, that you ask yourself, when was it that I stopped being me? Because the answer to that question is the first step toward resurrection. Let me give you something practical before I finish. Tonight, before you go to sleep, do a simple exercise. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and ask yourself, what was the last time I was completely myself in childhood? Don't force the answer. Let it come. It may come as an image, say as a sensation, as a memory, or it may not come at all. If it comes, pay attention. That moment before the death, that version of you that existed before learning to hide, it still exists, in the shadow, waiting. If it doesn't come, that's okay. The unconscious works at its own pace. The question has been planted. The seed has been placed. At some point, something will emerge. And when it emerges, don't push it away. Don't judge it. Don't repress it. Embrace it, because it's you, the real you, finally trying to come home. In the comments, tell me, at what age did you stop being yourself? What was the moment, or the age, that you suspect this happened? If you can't remember a specific moment, tell me which of the 7 signs you most recognized in yourself. And if you want me to make a specific video on how to resurrect a specific part of the self, tell me which one. The spontaneity, the sensitivity, the individuality, the confidence, the self-worth. Tell me which one you most need to rescue. There's a day in the life of every child, raised in a narcissistic family, that no one mentions. The day childhood died. You didn't realize it at the time. You were too young, too busy surviving. But now you know, and knowing is the first step toward resurrection. The true self hasn't died. It's just been buried, and it's waiting for you. Until the next video.